call the meeting to. And then was Karen May not?
Maybe she
Came and went?
Yep, she came.
All right. Perfect. So the first thing we'll do is look at the agenda, approve the agenda, or are there any proposed changes, modifications, additions? All right. Hearing none, I guess I call to approve, or is it just unless contested? Okay.
You could move on to the board meeting overview.
All right. Well, let's make sure too, there's no public participation, right? Nothing online? No. All right. Then we'll move on to the board meeting overview. So I was able to attend with Jim as my first board meeting. And so I guess I'll just go over kind of the big ticket items of what was reviewed. So the first thing was that they talked about the budget committee did go ahead and approve the March 21st budget. So they're looking to adopt that at the May meeting. There was also a comment from the board members just in the beginning about the DEQ cyber attack, because that was hot off the press. And it did raise the question of, is LRAPA vulnerable? And, is that something that we should look at a little bit more? And then at the end, there were some public comments, and they actually discussed, because generally they have the public participation in the beginning, but sometimes they don't have any comments until the end of the meeting. So it was brought up that maybe they actually put another slot at the end of the meeting. So if there were any comments from the public based on the information. Let's see. Went over some of the fee increase information, and there weren't really questions from the board, but it was noted that there are differences between LRAPA and DEQ fees and how those are implemented. Howard Saxon, did I pronounce it? Saxon,
Yep.
would like to see a side-by-side. So that was one thing that was brought up, because there are some differences in the fees, application fees versus annual fees, and how that compares. And then they went over the new format of the director's report, highlighting some of the big changes. And then there's recognition for Travis on his time here. And there was also a little lengthy discussion on, because of the timeline and the performance evaluation and how that was going to work out. And so I'm kind of still navigating how that's going to work. And then there was an announcement about a new local news source for Eugene and Springfield called Lookout Online, and checking them out, and which I have, and
we've already been engaged with them on a couple stories, I think. So
yeah. So if you haven't seen them pop up, they've gotten recognized as a Pulitzer Prize winning, right?
I think the one that
Sacramento.
there's a similar contingent, I guess, down in California that has been recognized for some good journalistic efforts, which in our space, the world, we could use some good journalistic efforts.
So that was kind of the big items, but I'm sure Travis can give us a little bit more, elaborate on some of those.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. That was a good overview. I think the one thing that I'll just add to is, so the board brought or asked that we have a conversation with them of just detailing how our fee structure works for LRAPA versus DEQ. And with that, a call out to the public, to the regulated community to say, hey, we're talking about fees if you want to come and hear the information being shared, as well as if you want to engage with the board and provide any comment. And so that's where a bit of the public participation component came from. So we had folks there at the beginning who were like, yes, I'm a member of the public and I could have something to say, but maybe not. I'm more interested in the fees discussion. And then after we went through and talked about how LRAPA's fee structure works in comparison to DEQ, there was a hey, I want to provide a comment. So I think the lesson learned, or the reflective point for us, the new process we will do in a board meeting, is if we recognize that we have members of the public at the start of the meeting, we will modify the agenda at that point in time, and then we'll add a follow-up agenda item at the end to provide a secondary opportunity for the public to comment if they so chose. And it would only be an opportunity to comment on something that was on the agenda, as opposed to bring something new up at the end of a meeting. Would feel a little kind of awkward and clunky to do that in that space. So that was some of the reflection taken from last board meeting.
And I would say contextually, for those of you that are not familiar, just in case, our fee structure is kind of a standard 4% increase year after year versus DEQs, which can be a little bit more, what's the word? It's dependent upon legislative approval and kind of things like that, so it can have like large jumps and a little harder to predict. And what I thought was great was it was the people who made time to come here who one happened to be in painting. I believe he did paint applications. He said he very much preferred how El Rapa was approaching that for his business. It gave him a lot more security and he felt very good about that, which is nice to hear given that he had made all that time and energy to come here, because he had heard rumor was there was going to be significant, like tens of thousands of dollars of change in fees, and that had him very concerned.
And the elaboration there too, thanks Matt for mentioning, is at least in that specific, so he was on a general permit, or he is on a general permit that El Rapa has a general permit for with a fee structure here. DEQ is getting rid of that general permit, forcing those regulated by that general permit. I think it was a paintings like for painting cars and things like that. DEQ is getting rid of that general permit, so they'd have to be on a different permit fee structure type, which is where that big jump for those outside Lane County were having to endure. That was not the circumstance for his business in Lane County.
We've also gotten that feedback on the restaurant inspections that they prefer
A set consistent every year versus big jumps every so on. Yeah.
Yeah, the primary thing was being able to kind of crunch numbers and budget if you can account for a little bit every year as opposed to just all of a sudden doubling or tripling.
Yeah, and Max, thanks Max, chrome plating was what that was, yeah, so that was the finer detail we weren't remembering, thanks Max.
So a few more people have joined. We did a round of introductions, you guys. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves, the new people who have joined? Ben, Rachel, are you?
Rochelle.
Oh, Rochelle.
Yep, she's our administrative manager.
Ben's on, great.
Ben is here. Hi, Ben.
Administrative manager, sorry about that. All right. So anything else to add, or should we move on to the enforcement data and communication?
If there's questions for anybody on the board, kind of overview and things that we went into.
Right. All right, so we did let the board know that we've been working on looking at the enforcement data and communication and did have some recommendations. And earlier today, Heather sent out in preparation for today's meeting, the update. So I'm not sure if you guys online had a chance to look at those. These were based on the feedback that we provided. So if we want to kind of look at the big ticket items, the first thing was adding a numbering system to show the count of unique complaints. So the conversation before was that sometimes, you know, you may end up with 20 complaints in a month, but if it was one person 10 times, that might be nice to differentiate, just to kind of see. It might reflect a little bit more about what's going on. And so that was something that was added. I did notice on the table, though, I guess we're probably not going to try to backtrack retroactive figure out, right?
Yeah.
It's just going to be moving
Yeah,
forward.
moving forward, yeah, so to elaborate here on the sheet that you have, so the way I envision of communicating this information, and this is kind of where for the CAC, as we present this information in this format, is how we're thinking this translate to, is that how it's being received? So the idea is in parentheses, that number notation is the number of unique complainants. So in this example, it's a 1-to-1, but if there was, like, hypothetically, if there was 3 complaints on International Paper and it came from 2 different folks or complainants, meaning one of them complained twice over that period, that number for International Paper hypothetically would be a 3, and then in parentheses would be a 2. Does that make sense, I guess, is kind of the question of, could that be interpreted and understood what that means?
That said, under smoke complaints, there's no distinguishing. So is the idea that it will have 20 to 20 and 1 to like, so we're going to do it for all the different? And it will be monthly only, or are we gonna see this cumulative? I guess would be my question.
So this is a March 1st, 2025 to March 31st is what this, so it's a monthly table. So that data would just be here in the last month, here was the complaints. And the focus that I had here was just on industry as I was getting the sense of that's where a lot of that potential benefit of having that breakdown could be. So I didn't consider applying that to things like outdoor burning and homewood heating and otherwise, but that's a place to kind of take the temperature of the room. Would that level of delineation be helpful and valuable? And that's kind of a open for discussion item, I guess.
What have you seen in the past for smoke and homewood heating? Do there tend to be repeats?
Well,
Sometimes.
yeah,
There can be. There
It's
can be.
not, I mean, I think there's more unique than there are, but it depends, like, there's like a couple homewood heating place at homes where people complain multiple.
would you, so I guess then, yeah, Heather, so if we have, let's say we have a residential address that we get a homewood heating complaint on throughout a month, just by gut check for yourself, how many times might that single residence get a complaint from just that single complainer versus multiple
There's
complainers?
typically not multiple. It's typically one, usually right next door neighbor, or, you know, where it's affecting them the most.
And it really is dependent upon the person who's actively burning, whether or not they seem to be receptive to if we have someone go by or not. I think what happens is sometimes there's kind of this long-standing disagreement and the neighbor continues their behavior. The other neighbors kind of hit their, I can't take this anymore. And that's when we'll see that kind of like heightened, you know, throughout the course of a week. There, you know, especially wintertime homewood heating when the inversion's here, that we had one in particular that was very motivated. The one neighbor was very motivated to make sure we knew that it can, you know, that in their opinion, this was continuing. And I'll just to lift the hood a little bit, in that instance, the neighbor was actually burning within the parameters and had really dry wood. And we went and visited and we're very impressed with how they were conducting their homewood heating. It probably was more a matter of that particular neighbor was very sensitive to just smoke, period. And I don't know if that particular complainant walked away feeling real great about what we reported back, but the calls did stop.
It was an example where there can be times, be it industry, residential, homewood heating, or outdoor burning, where we say the rules and regulations are the person's well within their right to do this activity, and we can note your complaint, but there's not a reason for us to intervene in this situation.
Other opinions?
These are complaints, not violations.
Yes, these are complaints. So as an example, with industry, we can receive a complaint and we can follow up and like look at what was going on, and well, all permit conditions were being met. And yes, there was a person noting a negative component to this work or process is taking place, but from a permit condition or from a rules or regulations, that activity is a permitted activity. I think International Paper is an example in the sense that TRS, total release sulfur, is a component to their emissions, which it's basically just a stinky thing that it doesn't take much for it to be really smelt, and that doesn't necessarily mean something's wrong. It's just the nature of the pollutant is it has a lot of odor.
I would say for me, for consistency of data, if it's not a huge pain to differentiate, it might be better to just have the number of unique complaints
Throughout the whole.
throughout. Yeah, that way you're actually seeing it and you're just being consistent with identifying, because if somebody, you know, if you were, there could be reason to see that. And also if you were on the side of not doing anything wrong, it's, you know, it'd be interesting for tracking purposes. But if it's a huge pain, to add that in.
Yeah.
We have all the data.
Yeah, we can easily do that.
Okay. And then I guess we would just keep track, like, I guess, thinking about this in a, you know, annual terms, right? If we're gonna be seeing it monthly, but it won't be transposed onto here, we just kind of get a rough idea of if that's happening often and the value. Okay.
We will, I think, in terms of feedback that we're hearing is the delineation of unique complaints to be not just industry specific, but just complaints in general.
Think so. Any comments, Paul, Ben, Chris? On that first one? All right, well then I think we'll move on to,
Paul's ready to.
Also attempting to.
Do we have any insight on why the numbers vary so much? Like, for example, outdoor burning, I see in this chart a high of 423, a low of 243, and in industry, a low of 75 and a high of 336. Is there any insights on why those vary so much?
Yes, actually.
some guesses.
I can provide some of that. So, Paul, I think those are good questions, insightful ones. On the outdoor burning, you'll note that, so that was in 2020. Actually, the board was really interested in that at the time. I was very new at ORAPA at the time. But the 2019, which I know is kind of getting to the end there, really it's kind of that 250 to 300 outdoor burning complaints we receive in a year is the norm. 2020 being kind of the COVID year, at the time, the reflections that was being had by Merlin, the director, and kind of compliance was everybody's at home. So any activity of people doing what would be a normal burn to where they're at work, missing that there's now the smoke, there's more acute awareness to that. But then also, knowing that smoke is a respiratory exposure item and COVID was also a respiratory item, people were especially sensitive to smoke. And so we believe that that was a driver force of the increase on outdoor burning complaints in the year 2020 specifically. On the industry component for 2021, I can tell you, I don't want to provide the specific individual's name, but a lot of that was driven by a single Lane County resident who was providing complaints to us consistently on a daily or in a day timeframe, which is actually really applicable and relevant to the conversation we're having here of how many unique complaints exists.
Oh, interesting.
When was that big event from the wood treating place?
Oh, from Gage Baxter, that was in 2019. That was October 6th of 2019.
So that's off this.
That is off that so what Jim's referring to is on October 6th, it was a Sunday, 2019. Our RAPA received, it was like almost 70 some odd complaints in a single afternoon of an odor complaint of something that was taking place, presumably at Gage Baxter. So that was a 70-ish some odd in 2019. In one day, yeah.
In general, though, it does appear that some trends are improving. Like you'd have to think that from a staff perspective, things are reduced complaints.
Yeah.
So, right? I mean, you look at the Homewood heating from 74 down to 39, probably in part because of the efforts being made. Industry as well.
I do think that there is just in general, like a wood stove usage is not as pronounced, I think, as what it has been, in the sense that there's new technology like ductless heat pumps is something that continues to be more and more of a resource that people are just by and large having added to their home. And I think that there's a component of that that's contributing as well.
And incentives to support.
Yes.
I was thinking of like, Air Toxics Oregon, Cleaner Air Oregon, that you might see, right, as industries are actually doing quantification and upgrades to their systems. You might see that go down as well.
Yeah.
I think you might possibly see some more wood smoke complaints because of that ice storm that knocked out power around here. A lot more people are installing wood stoves and other types of alternative heating.
Yeah, that's a valid point too. And I know that a couple of years ago, I had a conversation with someone who, it was in reflection to the city of Eugene when they were considering a natural gas ban. And their perspective, this was just a single person I talked to on the phone was, but they shared a similar perspective, which was, for one, if natural gas is not as accessible, that then creates wood stove heat as a form of heating if natural gas isn't as available. So as natural gas becomes less of a considered appreciated form of heating from perspectives, wood, I think, is another alternative that still is a viable solution for a lot of people.
Any insights on the general air quality numbers? They seem to be going up post-COVID, and was 17 in the first quarter of 25, and then 32 and 25.
There's been kind of an anomaly in that one, I believe, is that there's this smell of cologne.
Oh, that.
In
I got another
Eugene,
one.
there's this organic behavior because a lot of our community now communicates online, and so on Reddit specifically is one of the channels. They kind of will build these little communities that are like, hey, are you all smelling the odd cologne? And then other people start. It's this interesting dynamic, and they'll talk to each other. Oh, make sure you let El Rapa know that that's happening. But we're having a very difficult time identifying a source.
There, what Matt speaks to is we will see, be it on Facebook or on Reddit, we'll get a lot of complaints in a collective period of time, like in a day, we'll have 3 or 4 complaints that say, hey, there's this interesting smell. And we will find on a Reddit or a Facebook where someone will put our link and provide that complaint, which is appreciated and nice, and says that it helps to definitely like validate that, yes, there was this odor or this issue or this smell at this place. Sometimes on, especially to that more miscellaneous or unknown, it can be difficult to find what was an odd smell that was noted at this particular time, especially if our inspectors aren't able to be out there and catch it at that point. Those follow-ups, especially if they're not attributed to like an industry source, that we can then go talk to the industry to say, hey, on this date and time, was there anything interesting or funky going on? Let's look at your reports that you have. But a lot of times if it's like firmly in a residential neighborhood and there's this odd smell of cologne or some other thing, I think that those online communities can provide 4 or 5 complaints on this issue through that, like make sure El Rapa knows about it. But still it could be hard to really get to the bottom of what was that smell or that thing that was being noted.
Thank you.
I would also just thinking about it, as Travis was sharing, is I do think sometimes people who want to share what they're experiencing, they don't have the language to really capture it. And so it's like, the air's just nasty, like that kind of stuff. And so we just say it's a general air quality complaint because they can't really assign it to any one thing. They're, like West Eugene for a while, they're just like, it's so nasty over here. The air's nasty. And do you have any idea where it might be coming from? No, it just is gross, okay? And so you're like, okay, we'll note that, we'll put it in the book. We really can't act on it because it's just too broad.
Yeah.
But we don't want to diminish that they're experiencing a concern or that they want us to be aware of that.
What's the difference between general air quality and unknown?
So general air quality is a thing where we can identify, like have a sense of what that source is. As we're unknown is kind of more to those, like it smelled like a cologne thing that it's really like we have no ability to have any sense of what this could be. As well, general air quality can be something like, as an example, we do get complaints from wildfire smoke where someone is complaining to us that the air quality is bad because of a wildfire, and that's a general air quality complaint. But so we know the cause, we know what the issue is, but how do we categorize it? So there are instances where it kind of hits that category.
Do we send them to Chris?
Yes. Chris, we got a complaint for you. If you want to refer over.
Well, and then miscellaneous, is that just oddball things that don't fit anything else?
Yeah, I guess unknown versus miscellaneous is, the unknown is that we literally don't know. Miscellaneous is that it's more categorically divided out.
Fugitive dust is one, right? And asbestos was under that.
No, that's right. I was gonna move that one up too.
Yeah.
So on that question though, I think that reflection is how to more provide defining traits of what these categories are. I think for folks because I think the question of, well, what is general air quality? What's versus unknown or versus miscellaneous? Or those questions, I think, provide merit to we should add some qualifiers or some description or some information. So someone's looking at this, they can have more of that insight to what those items may be or those categories are. So I think that's some good feedback here.
Maybe under unknown, add source, unknown source, would that enhance any?
And like, what do you mean, I guess?
Just add.
Well, instead of just unknown,
Oh,
unknown
unknown
source, would that clarify the differences?
I like it, yeah. Nonsense.
And it sounds like the person doing the categorization has an understanding of what these terms mean.
Yeah, so when we enter our complaints, when the complaint gets entered, we put them in, and then when they're followed up in the inspection, that's when it's kind of like concluded of the like, here's how this is, or here's how this goes. So, because like when you enter it, as an example, Heather will say, okay, this is an industry complaint, but then an inspector, when they get that complaint and they look into it in the data, they're like, actually, this was an industry, the source was this other thing. They will go in and change that. So there's kind of like 2 points that happens is upon entry, but then upon like completion of the file.
But they understand the difference between general, miscellaneous, and unknown.
And pulling those definitions out here in this report for a public perspective, I think is a key insight.
Perfect. And then number 2, you guys created a new section for notes that gives some context around the complaint pattern. So that's just the notes section down below, right?
And so I think in my mind, so Heather's the one who upstates this. And so she would be the person who's writing that notation on that, which could be just a general, like, most of the complaints were industry complaints. Or if it was there was this thing that took place, like, the October 6, 2019 complaints on J.H. Baxter, if something like that were to reoccur, this is a place where we could pull some of that nuance out or provide some of that insight. I think more broadly too, if that repeat was to happen in our board meeting and our director's report, there would be more elaboration on something to that effect. But if there is a notable thing, that's a space to put that narrative in there.
Or like a source reports an upset, something like that, right? That correlates.
That we see the data points to that.
And then the third item is that you guys added asbestos as a new category.
Yes, which kind of on the miscellaneous, that I didn't have that forethought until kind of like today as we're talking about it, but there is needing to kind of pull that out of that group. And that's where having some definitions on this report will be helpful.
So then on the enforcement report, added bullet point E, which is the source type. So one thing that I didn't see on here that we did talk about too is where the complaint came from. Was it, or where the violation was derived, the enforcement?
Oh.
So we had talked about like, was this, how did you know about this? Was this a routine site visit? Was this a call-in complaint? Was this, right? And whether or not that has value to other people, I'm not sure. That was just something that I would be almost interested in seeing if this was, if staff just saw this when they were out and about, or.
Yeah, that was feedback that we missed in that. I'm glad you bring that up, because I in our like reflecting through of what do we need to adjust, that wasn't on my brain. I was thinking about, so.
Well, whether or not, I mean, if the group thinks it would be helpful to see or not, yeah.
Well, yeah, I like that in terms of both that someone complained and then there's a penalty as a result, that would maybe encourage the public to feel like, wow, you do get results. But also that if it's our staff finding it, hey, they're on the job.
That was a little quiet. I had a hard time hearing that last comment, but yeah, I really like that as well. That enforcement portion, that was actually one of the questions I was going to have is, what's the percentage of follow-up we have to reports? Is it 100%? Are we able to get to 80%? So I think that's a good question to ask.
Oh, I see. So I think the kind of nuance here to make sure I'm capturing it is on our enforcement report. So like we have this enforcement action that we're taking in that report, pulling out the, how did we like discover this? Or what was the narrative that brought us to this point of making the decision that yes, we need to take enforcement action here and step into those waters and then find resolution. Pulling that like center point or causational component here.
Like if the source just reported it to us.
Yeah.
Self-reporting was
That's
other,
enough.
now it's, which is actually good, right?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think of the different ways, but self-reporting should be on that, like, as an option too. Be interesting. All right, kind of wraps up the changes. Were there any other things that people thought would be nice to see or that we didn't include or new ideas?
I have a question about, let's see. About under the enforcement, it's page 13. IP, item 4. Under A, I couldn't understand the sentence that it is alleged that the additional monitoring requirements. I don't know if I'm just thick, but that sentence to me doesn't make sense.
Oh, so because it's still pending, it's not this is still in an open case, so we use the language of allegedly in those.
Yes,
type of-
I understand that part, but it says it is alleged that the additional monitoring requirements were not implemented when the permit was issued, with the required monitoring was not performed for the
Oh,
first 6 months. And it's like, there's so
Yeah.
many subjects and objects there.
clean up that
I
language.
got lost.
So
in the
the,
sentence.
I can elaborate to just kind of clarify. I see what you're saying in terms of we should fix the kind of the subject, kind of just the written of it. But for that enforcement context, so International Papers permit was issued last year. And within that new permit, there was some additional monitoring requirements, which they were not doing initially with that new
Okay.
permit. Then they recognized and said, hey, we are seeing that had new monitoring requirements that we were supposed to meet. We're
Okay.
recognizing that they weren't. So in this situation, this was a self-reported instance. They came to us, they corrected, they're now doing that monitoring, but we need to reconcile the fact that technically they were not doing the monitoring as described.
Okay.
in the permit.
Great, thanks.
Were they aware they were supposed to do the monitoring or?
They were aware. I think that, I guess my understanding through the engagement is, so like there's, environmental point of contact, is a new one. And so through the shift of the old environmental contact to the new environmental contact, I think some of that transition, while at the same time there's a new permit that they have to do with new requirements, in some of that transition, that's where there's more things here that we ought to be doing. And that was the stemming source of it. If I'm trying to not be too specific, vague enough, but if I'm
Yeah.
making sense, yeah.
No, it makes sense. Makes sense. Thank you.
Well, and I'd say that that's a really good example of knowing that it was self-reported adds a lot.
Also, just we were talking about outreach and when there's change of staff, sitting down with El Rapids staff to make sure you understand the permit. Like, we talked about that being like just an idea in the future, because it is really easy as a new person. It's possible that they were told, but they're just being so much information that it's hard to retain. And that's where and maybe you wait a couple of months, but that outreach of hey, if we could sit down and review and make sure we understand all of the components of this Good, that's, yeah.
On that, I mean, we're engaging, I don't know if I'll say their name or not, but there is a source, a Springfield source, who we are planning to pay a visit and we'll pull the permit out and like, let's sit down and let's kind of go through the permit to make sure that we have a good understanding of what El Rapa's expectations are and the source understands those expectations so they're being met. So there's a Springfield source that next week or 2 weeks from now, we're having a meeting. Our inspectors and the permit writer are going over and going to sit down through the permit to make sure that there's good understanding on both ends from what those expectations are.
Good. All right, let's see, any other comments about the enforcement data? Otherwise, I think we can move to roundtable. That sounds-
One other question. I noticed a number of liens taken out on property. And I was wondering, what is the history in regard to those liens being closed out? To your knowledge?
In like,
Well, a lien on a piece of property, if you want to sell your property or borrow money on your property, you need to close your liens out.
Mhm.
So what is the history of liens being closed out, or are there a lot of outstanding liens on properties?
What is our or not liability necessarily, but what is that accounted for amount?
That-
Yes, we actually have that number. I couldn't speak of what that number is at the moment, but that is an item that we do keep track of because sometimes you can place a lien on a property and then 30 years later is finally when something moves on that. So we do, I don't know what that number is off the top of my head, but we do have that. And it's something that would be, if there's a interest or need to be incorporated into our share out.
I'd be interested in just
Knowing
ballpark
what-
figures on those.
What that is?
Yeah.
But were you also asking about just what's the management process of our insuring?
Not really. It'd show up on any kind of court directed or real estate transaction. The lien should show up, so.
Our finance manager, Christina, who's not on the meeting now, but more recently, this topic has come up from her perspective, or has come up, and she's like, "Oh, we're putting liens on home or property. We should be tending to this and keeping track of this from more of the finance perspective versus just the enforcement perspective."
Mhm.
But the next meeting, we'll bring that number to you.
Thanks.
All right, should we start with people online for roundtable? Paul, you want to go first? Have anything for roundtable?
Yes, I'm something I'm kind of curious about. The new administration has announced a great deal of reductions in smog control devices on heavy trucks, which would likely result in higher NOx, lower soot, and better fuel economy. So my particular curiosity was about the NOx and the soot, which would show up for El Rapa in the PM 2.5s. Are heavy trucks really a significant portion of the emissions load in El Rapa's jurisdiction?
Yep, Paul, that's a great question. And transportation is the largest sector of emissions, and those heavy duty trucks, which are items like, your semis, not like your pickup trucks and those type items, those diesel engines in terms of the emissions inventory are a pretty large contributor to that. So from a PM or NOx perspective, the approach in the United States has been on transportation emissions is through when we build something new or something's rolling off the factory line, it has to meet these emission standards. And then over time, we'll lower those new vehicle emission standards. And then as the old ones come off the road, that's how we'll see that benefit. So a change in that approach on that perspective just kind of creates the how long do we see that benefit? It just prolongs that time before we see the older vehicles no longer on the road and the newer ones that are manufactured meet those higher standards. So there's a delay for when those changes actually have an impact on the airshed, but they do have an impact, no doubt.
Okay, thank you.
It's not something that El Rapa would have anything that from our rules and regulations that we would act on in our monitoring. We would note or see that, or not necessarily see an increase to perhaps, but how long does it take before those emissions are not impacting the airshed? It just prolongs the amount of time before that benefit is had.
Okay, thank you.
Chris?
Yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, I think I heard my name. I think I'm mostly good. We're in kind of a dry spell here as far as air quality relating to this upcoming summer. We're seeing a lot more burning this spring because of the ice storm damage cleanup. People are still progressing through that. So I mean, and I just bring that up. There's an impact to the air quality. I don't know that it's been extremely detrimental as far as El Rapa is concerned, but I am seeing a lot more burning out there just for awareness. As far as wildfire and a prognosis for the wildfire season, been extremely dry the last 2 weeks. We've been running on 2 or 3 fires every day already, which is a little bit concerning. But hopefully we'll get a break in May and June and pick up some more rain. But if we were to maintain the course we're on right now, I would predict a very active fire season and consequential wildfire smoke problem. But some more to come over the next couple of months. I'll keep you updated. But I think that's all I have for now.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, how's the work-life balance going for you as of lately?
Better.
Glad to hear that.
Yeah, better being back to my local job. Thanks for asking. Though I'm taking this meeting in between meetings, sitting in my vehicle in a parking lot, so it's not perfect yet, but.
Ben, you have anything for roundtable today?
Couple small items, I guess. In that vein, it can be difficult to meet at noon for people that are volunteering. So I don't know if we want to talk about potentially changing that to get more engagement, not just for the advisory committee, but also for the board. I know that that's a big issue for people to attend. And yeah, I guess I heard the discussion about the rate increase. I was hoping that maybe we could have a more detailed look at the budget in a future session. And the last thing, just I guess it kind of got discussed with the was it the cologne perfumey smell, but I guess like is there a process for like a deeper investigation when there are like a numerous complaints coming and it's not really clear what the source is, but it's like very clear that there's a ongoing issue. I would guess I was just curious more about El Rapa's process for that.
Yeah, thanks, Ben, for that question. We do have a process it's more of if we have a lot of complaints that come in that are all correlated with one another, there is a lot of interest in that and looking into like, what might this be? So in the circumstance of someone smells something and they post on Facebook or Reddit that says, hey, I'm smelling this. If you're also smelling, please report it to El Rapa. That's great because that does help to affirm for us that no, there is certainly something out there to be smelt or there is something that's creating an issue. So that provides more motivation for us to react to that series of complaints. If it's something that we can't in that time attribute to, be it an industry source or some other source, if it is we can't really know what that is, it does kind of die at that point in place. If we're able to connect to where that may be from a source, then that provides a lot more room and follow-up opportunity, such as it smells like this particular chemical. And we know that from our regulatory perspective, there's an industry source that these activities that they do create this type of chemical smell that we're reporting over here. That provides cause for us to go to that regulated source and say, hey, you make smells that we're hearing complaints on over here. What is going on for you at this time and date? And was there an upset or some other kind of thing that we can look into? But without first having that potential source that we can identify, if we don't meet that mark, then it does kind of become we're not really sure what this was or what to do next in response to it. So there are sometimes those odor complaints can be vague things that not much is done with because we're unable to connect it to that potential source. But we certainly don't just take that approach right off the get-go.
Right. Yeah, I guess something to think about more in the future, because I think there is like, you know, the issue with like, yeah, there's probably like multiple things that are kind of mixing together and making it hard to distinguish what the source is sometimes too. So
Yeah, part of it too is a bit of a resource component in we, through our work, regulate industry as well as implement programs from like a Homewood Heating, and that is the body of our work. So when there is a complaint that we can connect to really the body of our work, that's where we dive in and engage on. And if we struggle to be able to connect to that body of our work, it takes resources to make those connections. And we have 2 inspectors for the whole county. So there is a component of on those more ethereal, if you will, odors that are being sensed, how much resources do we have to continue to dig in to try to connect back to the scope of our regulatory work? That's a resource component, and sometimes we're limited on how much we can contribute those resources.
right, yeah. That's not very many people for a county with hundreds of thousands of people.
But it does, to the point though of, I say a lot, I really value complaints, community complaints, because that's just that data point. Like if there is something that's a funky odor out there that, like for us internally, we'll say like, yes, we got another one of those perfume complaints. It's another perfume complaint, you know, and knowing that now there's this sense that, hey, there's this perfume complaint and we continue to see it. That's just more data points for us over time to get to what becomes where within our regulatory body of work and scope can we like dig in and start to build in. So I can understand from a community perspective how it can sometimes feel frustrating to say, hey, I'm smelling this thing and it seems like nobody's acting on it because it's kind of out there. But that ongoing data point for us in time can be really helpful to eventually connect what can be sometimes hard to attribute sources of concern to a particular source. So the complaints coming in are appreciated, and from a community perspective, we really encourage that instance or that action to still take place, even though I recognize it can be frustrating to feel like it's going into a black hole and nothing's coming out of it.
Piggyback. So Ben, just to kind of piggyback on that, I get a visit as public affairs. I visit very regularly with the folks that go out and try to investigate these things, and they are referencing wind roses and looking for sources. But what's difficult is there's no clear delta because they're so sporadic and spread out throughout the community that it doesn't give you that ability to say, oh, it seems to be within this like mile radius or some level of like. It is really everywhere, and so it's been really challenging. We had on the perfume one in particular, we had a member of our team here was like, oh, my garbage can smelled, when I opened the lid, it smelled like perfume, and maybe they're spraying out the garbage cans. We're like, oh my gosh, that might be, you know, what it is. And I think that was a false lead.
It was.
It was.
We did follow that lead, and it turned out to be nothing burger.
But that is where odors in particular are very challenging to track down because we don't have a machine to collect and do that. We're using our noses, literally roll down windows in a car and attempting after we know. And so it's not a perfect science by any means. But to Travis's point, we very much take these things with the level of care that we can. It's just when you hit these points where it's like the variables are almost exponential to what we can act on, we're going to have to wait and just see if something else makes itself known to us.
But that is, I mean, that is a good example, like we did have this insight that maybe Sanipac or Rexius, or not Rexius, Lane, Apex are putting smell good things and there are things that we don't know about, and so maybe that's a thing, as we called and well, it's not a thing, but we do take complaints seriously and we do give them our might and effort to try to respond. And from a missions perspective, or not emissions, a mission-driven organization. From my perspective, we want to hire people who do subscribe fully to our mission. So that way we can be confident that they do care about these issues and these items, because that's part of our mission, is what's the air and how good is it?
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have any updates. Want to continue down this way? No, nothing.
Well, my vehicle is presently parked in the parking lot here at El Rapa, and I appreciate the electric charger that's out there that my car is hooked up to. So
Right.
for having that there, and along the same lines, for anybody interested in EVs, this Saturday, May 3rd, at the Sheldon Community Center, the Emerald Valley Electric Vehicle Association is having a show and meetup from 10 to 2. And the address there at Sheldon Community Center is 2445 Willa Kinsey. And that'll be an opportunity to look at a wide range of electric vehicles, take them out for a ride, ask questions, that type of thing. So 10 to 2 at Sheldon Community Center. Saturday, May 3rd.
We have in the past those kinds of the Emerald Valley events. I'm spacing his name right now, totally, who used to be Oregon legislature.
Phil Barnard.
Thank you, Phil Barnard. He would send emails to me to say, hey, we're doing this thing, and we would put those on our website and our events page. So that's an item that we still would love to carry on, putting those on our public calendar.
Send them a little shout out.
Yeah, thank you.
Great info. I don't have a whole lot, honestly, but I was thinking about the cologne smell and just other smells in general. Dryer sheets are another big one, like when you walk in the neighborhood or my neighborhood, and they can smell so strong.
Mhm.
Yes, especially certain types. So I don't know, just an idea on the
We will get complaints from folks about their neighbors' dryer sheets, and that is one of, because I mean, in a residential odor, that can be a point, and if it is identified, our response in that sense would be like, well, that's a knock on the door with your neighbor kind of instance, because from a regulatory perspective, there's nothing for us to engage on that one.
Right.
Kind of miscellaneous.
And I'm not saying you should, but sometimes it's just as small as dryer sheets.
We actually followed up on that because we thought, oh, maybe the warming shelters, when it was particularly cold this winter and they had done that, it was like, oh, perhaps they're doing an exorbitant amount of laundry as a result of all the guests. And unfortunately, again, the delta wasn't there. The wind wasn't cooperating. So it was like, even if they were doing a lot of laundry, which they do, but it's a good idea.
No, but that is a valid, like we do hear from folks when their neighbor, or that they recognize
They
that
switched to bounce and now.
they can be, put some odors out there.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was reflecting when I first started on the committee, and I was given this binder that had the committee bylaws in it and a list of current members. And I think we got away from doing that, and that might be a good way to bring in new people, the better understanding of the committee. And also along those lines, seems like probably 10 years ago, the committee wrote a couple of guidance documents to the operation of the committee, and I think one for the board of directors too. And I may have that somewhere if we're interested, but that might be something useful to include in that sort of thing too.
So each member was given a binder?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
See, that's how I
Yeah,
know.
with a new.
2011, that's how I know when I started.
I just created a new list for myself that I'm trying to make sure, with quorums and that sort of thing. And then making sure we go over the bylaws. That's not a bad idea, because I didn't have them when taking on the position. I was like, I should probably have these. So, okay.
Yeah, the
In
reflection
the
of
guidance documents, I haven't seen them.
basically like a CAC packet to.
Yeah, kind of a
Mhm.
welcome to your first meeting. Here's a binder with some info
Some
for you.
resources and questions, yeah.
Yeah, the names of your fellow committee members, way to get a
Yeah.
hold of them.
Industry, yeah, where they're from.
Kind of some, here's generally what we do, here's, if you have some basic questions, maybe this
Yeah.
information could kind of get that. Yeah, I think a resource that we could come up with to be helpful could be a nice ad. That's good
Even
feedback.
online would be helpful if you don't feel like you should be printing it out.
Robert's rules. I had to print for myself. My little cheat sheet.
Katie.
All right, thank you.
Okay, first of all, about the ambient strange odors, commercial laundries, hotels and motels do a lot of laundry. And then also automobiles, detailing and car washes use a lot of perfume in their products. You gotta tell them at your car, when you get your car washed, don't put any in my car, please. But then I had another concept, another idea of on South Second, the industrial facility that's towards the water, I forget what the name of it is.
In Springfield or?
Yeah, in Springfield.
Okay.
They have a series of exhaust fans that are just gigantic, that run, a lot of times they'll start them at like 4 a.m.
Okay.
and the bearings get out. And they get a little noisy, but I've often wondered, what are they exhausting?
What
Is it heat?
Is that,
It's the one that's, if you go down South Second past Main Street,
yeah,
it's towards the water right
okay,
there.
so yeah,
Yeah.
that
What's
is
the name of that facility?
Hexion.
Hexion.
So
Yeah, I just wonder what are they exhausting that they run those, because it's a huge set of fans.
I can't speak specifically to what the thing that you may be, but I do know that Hexion, they create formaldehyde.
Yeah.
They manufacture formaldehyde. So what's specific from that specific process, I couldn't speak off the top of my head, but oftentimes when we're speaking of things that are visible from an emissions perspective, usually it's steam if you can see it. If there's emission that if you can't see, a lot of times emissions that we're engaged on are things that you actually don't even see. Oftentimes, if you do see something, it's usually steam or it's just simply a PM component, PM pollutant like smoke or something like that. But I couldn't answer right here and now what might be the emissions of the particular unit. You
Yeah,
might be
it's
thinking.
transparent. It's not opaque at all.
I think it might be the cooling towers that they have over there.
Well, we can, if you, like, let's connect and kind of get more like insight on what you're seeing, and we can get those answers in.
More hearing, let's see.
Well, yeah, what you're observing, and then we can like follow up with that, yeah.
Perfect.
I just want to share out one more time, if you're available on May 8th, so next Thursday, we'll have the board meeting and immediately following from about 2 to 4. We're having a grand reopening. There'll be snacks and drinks. There'll be a ribbon cutting with Springfield Chamber. Travis will probably say a couple words, not probably, we'll say a couple words to talk and just kind of thank everyone for being there. It's a drop-in, so you don't need to be here at 2. I certainly think each and every one of you, especially those that are making time in your busy lives, if you can make it, we'd love to have you join us. If you can't, no hard feelings, but we'll be doing that next Thursday.
If you're really interested in seeing what this place looked like before we did the remodel, we will have a slideshow going of kind of like, here was the before and then here's the picture of the after. So that can be interesting, or for those who did not see what it looked like on the before side of things.
All right, well, hey, right on time at 1 o'clock. So I guess we'll go ahead and adjourn. So thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Till next time.
Oh, real quick, hey, Paul, question, and Ben, and I got a text from Rochelle saying that the audio was still a little quiet on your end. So I just want to get have you been able to hear it well, or has the audio been really tough sometimes?
The audio has been fine, except for oddly, Chris was very soft. I had to turn mine up. So I did have to adjust my volume up or down a couple of times. But as far as my microphone, I did not change any settings on that. So I'm
just interested in what that online experience is with our technology and making sure it's plugged in. Ben, what's been some of your audio reflections?
I had the exact opposite experience as Paul. You guys were kind of quiet and Chris was louder. But I don't know, it's improved since like mid-meeting. I don't know if you guys increased your volume somehow or
No, because that's
what.
our microphone here. So it just, because we're new, still trying to like make sure that the experience is good, and if there's like, we're
Yeah, so you're really quiet right now again.
Yes, you are. All of a sudden, Travis.
All right, microphone check, 1 2 1 2. Is that better if I'm like really intentional about speaking in the direction of the mic?
No, yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Oh, but whoever just laughed, that was really like at the level that it's been for the last while. So, hey.
Well, there's a ghost in the machine we still need to shake out. So
Oh, there you go. That's
Yeah,
all good.
you're full volume now all of a sudden, Travis.
okay. We'll have to call our audio guys who put this in and have them come back and shake the ghost out the machine.
And
So
please, if you want to take anything for the road.
Yes,
please.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah.